This conference will now be recorded.
Bill, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. Give me a chance to say hello to Dr. Conway there, the newest member there. Haven't seen him in a long time there. Well, since last meeting anyway.
Hello, Joe. Welcome back to Arizona.
Well, I'm still in Oklahoma here, actually.
How are you?
Yeah, just enjoying the sitting in on the meetings, what else is going on there. I see they actually got you added to the list there on the commissioners there. That was good of them there. So.
Thanks.
William, Commissioner Firebrand, are you on the line?
Don't see him on there.
Marta, could you reach out to him and see if you can?
Yeah, give me 1 sec.
Marta, this is Dale.
Dale, Marta's on the trying to call. She's
Okay.
offline for a moment.
I want to just let you know that I'm going to try to log in on the computer also. I don't know if that'll confuse anything.
Okay. When you do it, just make sure that you do it so your phone call is separate. It'll give you an option for that.
Okay.
Marta, were you able to reach Bill? We'll give it another minute and get started.
Yeah, Frank, I think Marta is muted.
Okay. Marta, are you online? Can you hear us? If you are, you're muted.
One second, Frank.
Okay.
Sorry, Frank, just got off the phone with him. He had the number wrong and he couldn't get in, so he's joining right now.
Okay. Give him a moment and we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. It is.
Well, how do I mute?
Dale's phone and computer are having feedback.
Yeah, I just muted him.
Good morning, everyone. It is now 10:04 a.m., November 19th, 2021, and I call this meeting of the Arizona Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to order. I'd establish a quorum. This is Frank Thorwald.
Dale Nations on the phone.
Mike Conway's here.
I see Stephen Cooper. William Firebrand, are you online?
I am.
Very good. We've got a quorum. Is there any conflicts of interest to declare? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 2, the review of the September 17th public meeting minutes. Is there any discussion on those meetings? Are there any changes to the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
No motion.
So moved.
Second?
Go ahead. I'll
Do we have a
second.
any further discussion before we vote? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
We have the minutes are approved. Moving on to item 3, oil and gas presentation, continuation by our administrator. Administrator Hoden, would you proceed?
Can do, Frank. Thank you. So as a follow-up to my presentation in our last meeting, the last meeting, just for anyone who may not have been in attendance, I gave a presentation about permitting requirements for oil and gas in Arizona, as well as a bunch of resources information with respect to where to find production information, any well file information, and where to submit requests for additional data. And so that presentation will be made available on the website by the end of the year with the new website rollout. But if you would like to access it before then, you can submit a request and we can get you a copy of it. So today's follow-up to that presentation, the next presentation in the sequence is going to be about drilling. And so this presentation is going to be all about drilling requirements in the state of Arizona and a lot of drilling terminology that you may often see within the well files if you're viewing those. I've kind of presented this information in a way that I hope will be useful to the public. It may be a bit elementary for some of our operators, but I'm hopeful that it's a useful piece of information. I will preface it by saying I'm not a drilling engineer. So if there's anything, any comments anybody wants to make or any changes that should be made to it, if I made any mistakes, please feel free to send me an email through the AZOGCC email, and I can make those corrections before posting it to the website. But we'll go ahead and jump right in. And so this is a repeat from the last presentation, but again, I just wanted to reiterate where the rules and statutes are located, and links to those documents for any of the public or operators, easy access to find those. And then also just restate the drill permits are required for any of the following wells: oil, methane, helium, CO2, injection, and geothermal wells. They're all regulated within the Arizona Oil and Gas Conservation Commission rules. And again, before you drill, an operator must have an approved permit to drill and valid, so therefore not expired, before commencing work. And again, all of those drilled or all those approved permits are going to be able to be found by the public and anyone interested on our website. They're typically posted within a week of approval, and I provided a link here below to access those. So any interested parties, and recently, the reason I wanted to reiterate this again is recently I have had some comments about people not being able to find where information is located. So I just want to reiterate where that information is available to the public. And then lastly, again, I reiterated Records Management Center here. The previous presentation can be requested through the Records Management Center, or any other data request can be made through the link right there with Record Management Center. I realized that I forgot to discuss spacing requirements in my permitting presentation, so I'm going to start with that here today. And so I just go over a little bit here some of our basic permitting or permit spacing requirements for wells, and then the opportunity to apply for exceptions from those. So spacing requirements, and I kind of gave a little bit of picture diagrams for people not super familiar with section, township, and ranges, and how spacing, what these spacing requirements might mean. And so they're different for oil wells or gas wells in the state of Arizona, the requirements. I started with oil wells here, which the drilling unit, which I defined a drilling unit so everyone can understand it, is the maximum area in a pool, which I will define pool later, which may be drained effectively by one well to produce a reasonable maximum amount of recoverable oil and gas in the area. And so for oil wells, 80 contiguous acres, which you can see in this top, in the top image, what 1/8 of a section is approximately 80 acres. That would be a drilling unit for oil and gas. Additionally, for oil wells, additionally, they must be a minimum of 330 feet. The surface hole location and bottom hole location must be 330 feet from the boundary of a drilling unit. So that's a minimum inset. It has to be from the edge or from the next closest adjacent landowner. And then within one quarter section, which I tried to explain what a quarter section is in the bottom image. So a quarter, as you can imagine, is a quarter of the quarter. They have to have one side in common with another quarter section that has been completed or drilled in the same pool. And so explaining what pool means an underground reservoir containing a common accumulation of oil or gas or both, and includes each zone of general structure completely separated from one other zone in the structure. So these are the oil requirements. Gas is a little bit different in Arizona, which also applies to helium gas. So our helium operators abide by the spacing requirements of a drilling unit being approximately 640 acres, but not less than 600 acres. And that not less than just accounts for irregularity in some of your sections. And so as you see in the top image, one section is approximately 640 acres, which is where that comes from. The spacing inset requirements for the gas wells is 1660 feet from the boundary of a drilling unit. And as you can see in the lower image, its typical sections are 1 mile by 1 mile. So it's typically one well within those. And then you can find geothermal spacing requirements in 12.7.107C, as well as horizontal well spacing requirements in 107D, if anyone's interested in those. But just want to preface by saying those aren't things that are currently being permitted within the state of Arizona, so I didn't go into any detail on those in this presentation. Now, exceptions to these spacing requirements can be requested. And so when an operator wants to file for an exception to these requirements, they must submit a bunch of documentation that is listed out in section 107E, which basically goes over reasoning for the request, and then also has requirements for notification of offset land, or I believe drilling unit owners within a mile, to explain, to make sure they've been properly noticed. And then with those exceptions, you have to give proper notice, which I believe is 15 days, and then have a hearing where the commission would vote on the exception. Operators in the past have had exceptions for spacing approved for various reasons. A good example of a reason that comes to mind would be based on geology and understanding that sometimes formations in the subsurface, sometimes geology is not this contiguous, consistent formation, and therefore the rock may change laterally across a small area, a specific area. And then one well by every 1 mile doesn't necessarily make sense in every situation. So that could be a valid reason that someone might want to pursue an exception. Additionally, I just kind of wanted to note, because this is another question that has come up recently, that the commission may order pooling, as pooling was defined previously, pursuant to ARS 27505 for oil and gas wells and 666 for geothermal wells. So that's an overview. I know spacing requirements is a question that a lot of people ask about, and also ask a lot about the exception process. So feel free to check those sections within the rules if you have any specific questions about those. All right, getting into drilling. So I kind of started this out with just some basic terminology. And the reason I started it this way is if anyone's looking through a well file folder, looking at the documents within a permit application or even a completion report, which is a Form 4, you might see some of these terms. A lot of the terms that I'm going to describe and explain throughout this presentation are going to be found in those documents. And this is just a way for you to navigate, for anyone in the public or interested parties to navigate those documents and understand exactly what they're looking at. And so I'll start with just the term pad. Basic terminology. It's basically just your drilling location. It's an area that's cleared and leveled so that you can bring in your rig and your drilling equipment. Typically in Arizona, operators are clearing pads that are about 150 by 150 feet on average. Sometimes they're a little larger, sometimes they're a little smaller. My experience in Texas, they tend to be a bit larger than that, just because you're looking at much deeper wells, a lot more equipment needed on those. So these are relatively small footprint pads. Then drilling rig is basically the integrated structure by which wells are drilled. They can vary greatly in size, as I explained, depending on the depth and the equipment necessary for drilling a well. It also depends on the processes by which you're drilling. So later on in this presentation, I'm going to get into drilling fluid and understanding types of drilling. And so drilling fluid, could also greatly increase the footprint. We'll also talk about pits that could increase the footprint. So there's a lot of variability in the size of rigs as well as mobility of the rigs. So what it might look like when you're what's called moving, which is mobilizing a rig. The amount of equipment being brought in may be larger or smaller depending on what the operator's needs are. And then a drill bit, I provide the link here. It basically just takes you to a rig zone article. It's how to drill, or how a drill bit works. I thought rig zone had some really interesting and basic training documents that were good resources for anyone who just wants a basic understanding of some of these topics. So I put those links here, and it's where I got a lot of the information for this presentation. And so basically a drill bit is a rotating apparatus at the tip of a drill string that cuts the rocks and the sediment to drill the well. Often drill bits are like a tricone bit, or so it's 2 or 3 points on a drill bit. They rotate and break up the rock. I mentioned in drill bit, the drill string. So the drill string is just the pipe by which the drill bit is basically rotated down the hole, and also drilling fluids are pumped down your drill string in order to bring cuttings back out of the well. And cuttings are basically that rock that's broken up by the drill bit. And then another term that people might see often that's good to know is spud. I think I mentioned the word spud in my last presentation, but basically spudding a well just means beginning drilling, beginning the process of drilling. So you'll see spud date on completion reports or on a lot of the documentation within a well file, and that just means the start of drilling. And then lastly, another term that I threw in here just because I didn't really find a better place to put it in the presentation is BOP. BOP would be in your application to drill. People will, operators are required to describe their blowout prevention methods and techniques that they're going to use. Basically, a BOP is a blowout preventer that's put on top of the wellhead in order to control pressure within the wellhead. And the requirements for the BOPs can be found in 12.7.113. All right, so now we'll get into a little bit more specifics. We'll talk a little bit about drilling fluids and pits. So drilling fluid can mean a lot of things. It's often referred to as drilling mud, which is added to a wellbore to facilitate the drilling process by suspending those cuttings, which is the broken up rock, and controlling pressure and stabilizing the exposed rock within the wellbore. In Arizona, many operators choose to use air drilling or forms of air drilling, which include air, mist, and foam drilling. Air drilling is just using compressed air as the sole circulation medium. So instead of putting fluid or water down the hole and creating a mud to bring those cuttings up, you're simply using air to bring compressed air to bring those cuttings out of the wellbore. There's also mist drilling, which is a mixture of air and fluid, oftentimes a mixture of water and soap. And then foam drilling, which is water, surfactants, and air that are combined to create a stiff foam, and that foam helps to suspend those cuttings and bring them out of the well. Those are all typically more cost-effective methods than using drilling muds, and can be more effective, can be more efficient, can also result in faster drilling speeds when mud's not necessary. And that often can be the case when you don't have overpressure drilling, you don't have risks of hitting high pressured zones, which is often the case in Arizona, drilling in areas that are well known and well developed. All right, drilling pits. Going into drilling pits a little bit, drilling pits can either be earthen, meaning they can be created, dug into the earth, or they can be portable pits that are brought in and just placed on the pad. Typically, they're placed right next to the drilling rig, and they are temporary confinement for drilling fluids and drilling muds, as well as cuttings. Pit construction is regulated under 12.7.108, and the construction of those, some of the examples of what is regulated, I just added here. So they have to be constructed with an impervious material to maintain and prevent escape of contained substances, prevent the entrance of any outside runoff into the pit, and must I got a little typo there, sorry, must maintain fluid levels. And by that, I mean there's a maximum fluid level to the top of the pit that they cannot go over, as well as there are mud composition requirements for earthen pits. So if it's going to be dug on site, there are mud composition requirements and things they cannot put into the mud. And then lastly, there are disposal requirements for that mud. And so the mud can be recycled or taken to an off-site disposal. And then depending on the mud composition, there are specific criteria in which evaporation and subsequent leveling of the pits are acceptable by the rules. So again, the pits are well regulated within the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission's rules, and you can look more into those regulations if you're interested in section 108. All right, more terminology. I know it's not the most fun of presentation material, but I just want to have a resource for people to look into. So I gave a lot of measurement terminology because, again, if you're looking at a completion report, measurement terminology is something you're going to come across in that document within the well file folder, and it can be really confusing if it's not something you're familiar with, just because, as you'll kind of see on this slide, there's a lot of different reference depth references or datums, and that can be really confusing because you don't necessarily understand what measurement you're looking at. And so some basic terms, generally you're going to see TD, which means total depth of a well. But there's also driller's depth, which is a depth of measurement while drilling. It's usually measured off of length of the drill string pipe. And so that is often can be used to measure total depth, but can also be measured. You can use driller's depth for measuring tops, which tops are tops of formations. And so you want to know whether it's a driller's depth or it's a measured depth. And so then datums and reference points, and I didn't go into too much detail explaining exactly what all of these mean, but I just kind of wanted to provide a reference so that if someone saw the term, they could look it up if they didn't know what it meant. And so when you're looking at depth references, you may see it listed as KB, which is Kelly bushing. Basically, Kelly bushing is just the height off the drill floor from ground level to the drill floor. Often it's measured off of something called the Kelly bushing height. And so you may see it, the depth of the well referenced off of Kelly bushing. It may be referenced off of ground level. It could be referenced off of subsea level. Could also be drill floor, which drill floor is often slightly different than Kelly bushing, or a rotary table, so RT. And then path measurements. This can also be a little bit confusing whether you're looking at the total depth of a well. You want to determine whether you're looking at measured depth or true vertical depth. So true vertical depth is going to be a straight line, a straight path from surface to the total depth of the well. It may not follow the path of the well bore, because as you know, a winding road is going to be longer than a straight road. So if it's not a perfectly straight well bore, your TVD is going to be slightly different than a measured depth. A measured depth is going to be the true length of that well bore. All right, and then lastly, I just included setting depth here because when looking at your completion reports or looking within wellbore diagrams, you may see your casing, and we're going to jump into casing next. And so I wanted to explain that setting depths would be the base of the string of casing, the depth at which the bottom of the string of the casing is set and cemented into place. And so that is called setting depth. All right, so jumping into casing types. I wanted to give an overview. I showed this diagram in the last presentation, and I wanted to include it again because I thought it was a really good simplistic diagram of casing strings. Again, I gave a link here, how does casing work, to a rig zone article. I thought it was a really good simplistic place to start on understanding different strings of casing. But some of the information that I listed here is from other sources as well, so it's not limited to that site. But casing basically provides stability, prevents contamination, and isolates water from producing formations, and then controls well pressure during drilling and production. There are many types of casing strings, as you can kind of see here, and that can be a little bit confusing when looking at documents, because sometimes you'll see different terminology and sometimes they can mean the same thing. So here I outlined when one term may be used for multiple things, but we'll start at the surface and move down. And so the first string of casing that's typically set is going to be conductor casing. This is usually the string of casing where the casing head is installed, and blowout prevention, which I mentioned before, the BOP, is usually installed into the string. And it's typically, almost always with onshore drilling, cemented to surface. All right, then surface casing. Now, conductor casing you're not always going to see on your wellbore diagrams. It's not something everyone lists on their completion reports, but your surface casing is always going to be listed. So surface casing is often set at the base of the freshwater zone. That's often a good place to set it, but sometimes it can be set deeper than that based on the formations and well stability. It prevents lost circulation and provides containment. And surface casing is typically, almost always, the goal is to cement surface casing to the surface. Then next would be intermediate casing. So intermediate casing is often set to isolate zones. This can be lost circulation zones, unstable zones, production zones. And casing, the top of cement of this string of casing must isolate any producing zone. So some wells require multiple strings of intermediate casing. So you may see intermediate casing more than once within a well bore. It doesn't always mean one string of casing, it's just the type of string. Additionally, an intermediate string can also be the production string. So some wells may only have 2 strings total, so you may only have surface and intermediate strings. In that case, intermediate would be production. Moving to production string, it's used to isolate production zones, as was mentioned in intermediate strings. That can be the case there as well, and can either be run through the production zone or set just above the production zone. When set above the production zone, that's typically called an open hole completion, and therefore casing does not go through the production zone. Next would be a liner, and a liner is just a string of casing that doesn't extend all the way back to the wellhead. So it doesn't extend all the way to the surface. It's usually hung from the base of another string or near the base of another string, and can be either intermediate or production strings, and typically you would cement the entire length of a liner. Tubing is a little bit different. It's not a casing string, but tubing is basically the conduit through which oil and gas are brought from the production zone to the surface for processing. Tubing is not typically cemented. Tubing is usually inserted in order to create a diameter which is optimal for production of the well, and protects your production casing from wear and tear, from corrosion. And the nice thing about tubing is because it's not cemented into place, it's usually they usually use packers to hold it into place. It's designed to be removed and reinstalled and be replaced throughout the life of the well. And so those are the different types of casing. When you're looking at a wellbore diagram or looking at a completion report and you see these terms, now I hope people will better understand what they're looking at and understand that there are many layers of protection between what is being produced and the rock formations that they pass through. And so many layers of steel casing, many layers of cement, in most wellbore designs. All right, moving into cement. So cementing is performed when a cement slurry, so wet cement, is deployed into a well via pumps. The cement slurry flows to the bottom of the wellbore through the casing, which will eventually be the pipe through which production flows to the surface. It fills the space between the casing and the wellbore. So basically on the back side of your casing to the rock formation, and then it hardens. And that holds your casing permanently in position. It creates a seal as well so that outside materials cannot enter your well, as well as materials with production within your well cannot enter the outside of the well. Again, I included a link for some basic information, a rig zone link there for continued reading. And then some basic information. There are 8 classes, standard classes of cement from the American Petroleum Institute. API is a standard used across most of the oil and gas industry. Especially within the United States, but also internationally. And each of those classes of cement would be used in different situations. And so when you're looking at a completion report, you may see the class of cement listed, and that's basically what that means. So the classes of cement just has to do with the cement properties. And then cement volumes are needed, the volume of cement that's needed is calculated prior to cementing. And so this ensures you have the correct amount of cement on site before you even start a job. And so you can calculate this using the size and weight of the casing, as well as the hole diameter. And you can determine an estimate of the volume needed to fill the space behind pipe. And operators would do this calculation. This calculation for estimated cement needed will be included in your application to drill, as well as will be reported on the actuals used, will be reported on the completion report after the fact. And so all of the information regarding the cement that's actually put into the well is reported to the commission. And then cementing methods and procedures and requirements, they depend on the casing string. And so within the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission's regulations, we have regulations regarding surface casing, as well as intermediate and production strings. So 110 is your surface casing, and section 111 is your intermediate and production strings. Some other basic terminology I just threw in here, you may see TOC, and in this situation, it would mean top of cement. And so basically, depending on the string of casing and the design of the wellbore, the top of the cement can vary by string. Often operators in Arizona plan top of cement to be the surface for all strings of casing. That's usually what I see in applications, but is not always the case and is not always required. Additionally, a CBL. A CBL is a cement bond log. Oftentimes, operators run cement bond logs after cementing casing in order to review the quality of the cement job. And by that, I mean you can make interpretations from the data from this log about, it is just an interpretation because it's not like you have a camera down there and you're looking at the cement, but it's showing you different properties that can be used to interpret what the cement may look like. And so you can determine things like whether there's proper seal, whether there's any channeling within your cement, and any remediation work may be needed. And you can also check your top of cement to ensure the cement moved as high as you wanted it to move, and you have proper isolation. And then lastly, that kind of brings me to mechanical integrity tests. So both sections within our Oil and Gas Conservation Commission requirements, 110 and 111, have a section for mechanical integrity testing. So after casing is set and cemented, it must be tested for at least 30 minutes to 70% of the internal yield pressure, or 1 psi per foot of the case depth, whichever is less. If that pressure drops more than 10% of the test pressure within the 30 minutes, it should be considered defective. And so defective casing requirements can be found in 112, and remediation that is needed. Immediate remediation is required in the event of defective casing or cement, and all of the remediation work is required to be reported to the commission within 15 days of the test, so of the failed test in that event, or testing results are required to be submitted to the commission within 15 days if they're successful as well. All right, a little bit about some of the data collection and data byproducts from drilling. And so a little bit, we'll talk about drill cuttings, and I discussed cuttings before, but cuttings are basically fragments of rock that are brought to the surface through the drilling process. The composition and nature of those cuttings depends greatly on formation and many variables from the drilling process. But cuttings can be very useful information, so the operators must furnish samples of drill cuttings at 10-foot intervals to the commission, and those samples are sent to the sample repository located in Tucson, Arizona. Cutting samples are available by request for public viewing with advance notice to ensure we can have the proper resources available so that anyone can view those. But just want to make it known that those are publicly available information, as long as it's outside of the confidentiality period, because cuttings are also protected under or confidential under 121C of the Arizona Oil and Gas Conservation Commission rules. But outside of those dates, they would be available to the public. Some additional data that may or may not be collected during and after drilling would include mud logs. So mud logs are logs created via interpretation of your drill cuttings. So you would have a mud logger on site potentially, or even after the fact, review your cuttings and create a log basically describing rock type, composition, mineralogy, grain size, many variables about the rock characteristics that were encountered. Oftentimes mud logs are created real time. Your mud logger would catch those cutting samples every 10 feet and interpret them, and that information can be useful in real time while drilling to see, okay, you've transitioned from one formation to the next, you know, if that's critical information while drilling. Next piece of information that can be very useful and you may see within well file folders would be wireline logs. And so logs are measurements collected at specific depths in the well bore to be used to interpret geology and reservoir characteristics. Logs there are many types of logs, and so some basic types of logs are electric logs, induction logs, there's gamma ray logs or spontaneous potential logs. And so I plan to have a future presentation going a bit more into understanding geology and the data that's collected through the drilling process, as well as the completion process that can be used for future interpretation of your formations, and basically some basic information that may be reviewed prior to drilling a well as well. And so we'll go into more about wireline logs and logs in general in the future. But there are two types of logs, open hole logs or cased hole logs. Basically the difference is exactly what it sounds like. Open hole logs would be performed, that logging would be performed before casing is set and cemented, versus cased hole logs would be after. There are different types of logs that can be collected. You know, only limited logs can be collected after a hole is cased, but there is some data that could be collected in that event that if it's needed. Then there's LWD and MWD. Basically, that just means logging while drilling or measurement while drilling. And this is a log that's collected. It's typically on your drill string, and so you'll be collecting data. This is oftentimes used in horizontal drilling in order to ensure you're staying in the formation that you're targeting, staying within your target drilling. Again, that's not something that is currently happening, currently being permitted in Arizona, but just wanted to give the information and make it available in case you ever come across those terminology. And then a directional survey can be also collected from MWD, which is basically a survey of the wellbore orientation with depth. And so you may see a directional survey in a well file folder as well. So that's just some of the additional data that you might find within a well file folder. All right, that was a lot of terms. So if I said anything incorrect, again, I'm not a drilling engineer. I did my best to provide some basic information, but please feel free to submit any questions or feedback to the email address, and I would love to add more information that may or may be useful, or remove information if I misstated anything. So, but thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, Administrator Houghton. I appreciate that presentation. Let us move on to number 4, agenda item 4, Myriad Resources. Administrator Houghton, would you fill us in on this?
Absolutely. So Myriad Resources has reached out with respect to the Aztec 3-1 and requested a 2-year temporary abandonment. Basically, they're requesting this temporary abandonment status in order to explore project economics as well as infrastructure options. They estimate that 2 years will provide them adequate time to develop their path forward. They've submitted all the necessary documentation to show future potential of the well and all required documentation throughout the well process. And so it is requested the commission discuss and possibly vote on this temporary abandonment for 2 years.
Commissioners, I believe somebody from Myriad Resources is here. Do you have any questions for them?
This is Dale Nations. I don't have any questions particularly for Myriad. Resources. I understand they want to keep the results of that well confidential for the 2 years that they're requesting. So I don't think we can discuss what the evidence is of the future potential of the well. I have an interest in that, but if it's going to be confidential, we shouldn't be discussing it in an open meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Nations. Is there any other questions for Myriad? Any other discussion? Do I not hearing any? Do I hear a motion for approval of this?
I've got one. This is Dale Nations. I move to approve the 2-year temporary abandonment status for Aztec 3-1 SD.
Do I hear a second for Mr. Nations, Commissioner Nations' motion?
I second that. This is Mike Conway.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries. They have their extension.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Commissioner Cooper. Does the board need to act on the confidentiality request as part of this, as a separate motion, or has that already been approved by Oil and Gas?
Administrator Hoden, what do we have to do on that?
Nothing needs to be done. Confidentiality is automatically granted for 1 year from the date of total depth was reached, and they can request an extension of the additional 2 years, at which point that expiration occurs.
Thank you.
Hmm?
Thank you, Commissioner Cooper. Moving on to agenda item 5, Arizona Energy Partners 2-1 MS, temporary abandonment. Administrator Hoden.
Yes, absolutely. So Arizona Energy Partner has requested a 6-month temporary abandonment status for this well for the 2-1 MS in order to mobilize a drilling crew. It was mentioned at the September meeting that they had been experiencing some mechanical delays on the rig, and due to those mechanical delays, they've had a change in crew. They've been unable to mobilize the new crew at this point and do not have a firm date set on that mobilization, but due to the suspended activity, they're requesting temporary abandonment status. They believe that 6 months is adequate time to get the new crew that they have a contract in place with on site, and gives them enough of a buffer in case of unforeseen circumstances such as weather. But it's requested to discuss, consider, or possibly vote on this 6-month temporary abandonment.
Administrator Hoden, what's your recommendation on that?
I believe all proper documentation has been submitted by Arizona Energy Partners with respect to the current status of the well. As I think I've mentioned in my prep email, the well, all documents, the well is currently surface hole has been drilled and casing has been set. The well is secure and shut in. So I would recommend approving.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for Arizona Energy Partners or any discussion on this?
This is Dale Nations.
Go ahead.
I wonder if I think it would be better if we approve it for 1 year. I have a feeling 6 months would not be adequate, even though they say so.
Commissioners, is there any other comments or discussion on this? Is there somebody from Arizona Energy Partners here? Not hearing anybody. Doesn't look like there is. Do I have a motion to on this, to approve this?
Dale Nations here.
Go ahead,
I
Commissioner
move
Nation.
to grant. I move to grant a 1-year temporary abandonment status for AEP 2-1 M3.
Is there a second motion for Commissioner Nation's motion? A second.
Commissioner Cooper, I second the motion.
All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. They have their extension. Moving on to agenda item 6, a report by the Oil and Gas Administrator. Administrator Hoden, would you proceed?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll start by going over recent activity, drilling, completions, as well as some plugging and abandonment recent activity. First, I'll start with the Cobalt 20-21-21-1. The Cobalt well finished perforations and completion of the well in August. They've submitted all required completion paperwork for that well and are in discussions with the administrator regarding the status of that well. The Pinta South 22-5 SD State. Pinta South applied for a plugging and abandonment prior to the last meeting, I believe, and it was approved. The update on this, the status of this is that Pinta South submitted notification last week that they did intend to begin the work on the plugging and abandonment of that well, and they will submit the documentation upon completion of that work. Next would be Ranger Development submitted 5 applications for plugging and abandonment, and those 5 applications were approved on Tuesday of this week. Those are for the Ranger 33-3 PD, the 34-3 PD, the Hortenstein 1-9, the Ranger 33-1NS, and the Ranger 34-1NS. And those were approved and have not received notification yet. They've commenced work, but we'll keep everyone apprised on any changes in the future. And then lastly, an update on the rare earth exploration 12-1 and 28-1 state plugging and abandonment. The update that I wanted to give to the commissioners on this is with respect to the fact that we had a new operator reach out to the commission over the last month requesting possible transfer of ownership and operatorship of the 12-1 state. This operator is in discussions with state land currently regarding transferring the leases. They were informed by the administrator of the process by which that they would need to request ownership and operatorship transfer, but that they first must have the approved lease transferred. And so they will be in touch at which point the lease has been transferred and all documentation for state land is approved. And at that point, it will be brought to a vote for the commission, but there is not a vote needed today on that. And then item 6B, well, the website redesign progress update and timeline. Another update, I think I mentioned during my presentation that the presentations that I've been giving will be on the website by the end of the year. The current timeline with ADEQ on the website redesign is that all of the new material for the website is to be, the last of it should be handed off to ADEQ staff by December 2nd, and their goal is to have it all live by the 1st of the year. So that is the current timeline for the progress of the website redesign. And again, most of the redesign is changes to the code language of the website. It will, in the beginning, probably look very similar, but some information that we are preliminarily adding to it would include updated production information, updated meeting video recordings, updated presentation materials, and hopefully the goal is some updated checklists as well as forms for operators for the application processes and post-drill documentation requirements, so that the requirements are more clear and in alignment with the rules. And so lots of changes coming by the end of the year that you can look out for. And I will send an email out to the mailing list, upon which point that the website is live with a link so that everyone can take a look at it. And then next, 6C, a rules update. So the rules update, there's a lot of subgroups here, and I'll kind of walk through the reasoning for all these subgroups and give updates on each of them. So first would be the 5-year rule review. The update on the 5-year rule review is that the commission submitted a request for a 120-day extension, and that extension was granted earlier this month. So the new deadline for the 5-year rule review is going to be March 30th of 2022. The reason for that request is to allow us adequate time to go through the public comments and feedback that we've received from everyone, which we greatly appreciate, and address all of those comments. Additionally, we have been working, in terms of rules updates, we've been working with AZOGCC with respect to underground injection control, which is often referred to as UIC primacy. So the state of Arizona is seeking primacy from the EPA with respect to underground injection control regulation. Currently, underground injection control in Arizona is regulated by the EPA, but Arizona seeks to take over regulatory authority from the EPA. And with that, we've been working closely with Arizona's Department of Environmental Quality regarding how to coordinate efforts and looking at the Arizona Oil and Gas Conservation Commission's rules and statutory language, and understanding how we can collaborate on primacy. Looking for the right words, sorry. And with that, and kind of going with the discussions that we've been having with them over the last 2 months with respect to underground injection control, this has brought up the need for some proposed statutory changes. And so we're working on drafting proposed statutory changes with respect to updating statutes so that they meet EPA requirements to enable us to get EPA primacy. And so the goal is to pursue those statutory changes in the next legislative session. And because of that, it has put the rule package a little bit on delay. And so we hope to pursue the statutory changes before we submit the rule package to see how both the UIC primacy pursuit as well as statutory changes may impact or cause the need for change in order to align language within our rule package. And then the next item, 6D, would be federal funding opportunities. I think Chairman Thorwald will also go into this a little bit, but I'll give a quick update for everyone. The infrastructure bill that we discussed in the last meeting has passed, and effective November 15th, the president signed it into law. And with that, we've been working with the Interstate Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, or Conservation Compact, to coordinate the application process for these grants. And so within the infrastructure bill, Arizona plans to submit a letter of intent to apply for a small grant. And so the small grants, I believe, as we discussed previously, are $5 million grants for the purpose of identification of orphaned and abandoned wells in the state. And so we intend to submit the letter of intent by December 30th, which is the deadline for that letter of intent. And we are working with the AZOGCC on drafting that currently. Additionally, we're looking at some other grant opportunities that are available and may align with the needs and plans of Arizona. One being a large grant which the large grant funds would be used for the plugging of orphaned and abandoned wells that are known and identified. And then second would be a regulatory improvement grant. And the regulatory improvement grant is money that could be used or retroactively used for improvements of regulations to prevent future orphaned and abandoned wells. And so in the process of looking at what is needed for applying for all of these grants and what may be needed for the state of Arizona, we have begun a preliminary historic well file review with the help of Jim Ballard. Actually, he's been volunteered his time to help us look through the public records and conduct a preliminary file review to determine wells that have unknown plugging and abandonment status. He's made quite a dent in looking through the files, and our goal is to have a good preliminary review completed by the end of the year. And he and I have been coordinating closely, but I'd like to thank him for his help with this and his time. And then next would be the New Mexico Produced Water Consortium. The annual meeting for the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium is December 1st and 2nd in New Mexico. Unfortunately, we will not be able to attend, but we have requested access to the information that is presented there, and any updates that we receive with respect to their annual meeting will be shared at the next commission meeting. And then the web portal, I don't have any specific updates on the web portal now, but I believe Chairman Thorwald mentioned in the last meeting, there's the potential that the federal funding opportunities could potentially be utilized in some capacity with respect to web portal, well file organization in order to identify and prevent future orphan and abandoned wells. And then lastly, with respect to my updates, would be procedure manuals and SOPs. An update on that, our intern Brooke Bolger is actually out sick this week, but she's made a ton of progress over the course of her internship and over the last month with respect to procedure manuals. She's completely updated the procedure for updating the well viewer on the website, and she has she's very close to making a bunch of additional well files publicly available on the well viewer, and those should be live by the end of her internship, which is December 3rd. Additionally, she's going to continue helping us with this work into the spring. And so there will be a lot more work to be done on the procedures for and the online file viewer over the course of the next 6 months.
Commissioners, do you have any questions of our administrator on her presentation, on her report?
This is Dale Nations. I want to commend Marta. That's very thorough, and I appreciate that very much.
Is
You're very welcome. Sorry.
Any other commissioners have questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Cooper. The abandoned and orphan well grant, will that also include Native American lands as well?
That is a separate grant for Native American lands, and that
Thank you.
that is a separate pool of money as well. Administrator Hoden, on the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium, can you elaborate a little bit more on what they're doing with respect to desalinization of produced waters and the possibility of mineral production out of that and sale of water to reduce those costs?
Since the last commission meeting, I haven't really gotten much of an update from them with respect to the work that they've done. I believe they're going to give a thorough update of the last quarter of their research during the December 1st and 2nd meeting, and I will prep something to give an update on all of that research for the January meeting, if that is acceptable.
That's fine with me. Commissioners, do you have any other thoughts on that? Hearing none, I have another question for you, Administrator Houghton. With regard to the I just lost it, I apologize. The web portal, we talked about that. This is more of a comment, I think, than a question. Under the federal, under the new guidelines that they have for the funding for this, part of the requirement under that 5 million appears at this time, and they're still drafting some of this stuff, that you have to be able to report what you find on your website. And we don't currently have that capability. So we should be able to use these funds to be able to enhance that so that we can have that capability and the other ones we needed to be able to find the additional wells that we and determined the status of those wells. It's not just enough, of course, to know that we have questions about them, but we have to go out on site and review what the current status is if they are orphaned and abandoned. Administrator Houghton, do you have any more on that particular, what I just made, comments I just made?
Nope, I think that is accurate.
Okay. Is there any other?
This Commissioner Nation, Chair?
Go ahead.
I'd like to know, is there some way we can contact or get information from the New Mexico Research Consortium?
Absolutely.
Marta has already said she doesn't have the information about what they're doing, and I'd like to have that. I'd like to know what they're doing and what they're doing, particularly with potential production of mineral like lithium, for example, from produced water. I guess
go ahead.
My question is, can we get that information?
Absolutely. I can share contact information with the director of that program, of the consortium with you, share his contact information, and he's happy to schedule a call and discuss or send you any information that you might be interested in. I do have some presentations with respect to past work and research ideas that they've developed, but with respect to the actual progress of the research, I don't have an update at this exact moment, which is why I was just noting that I'll be better prepared at the next consortium meeting to give you a thorough update of what the status of their research is. But I'm happy to share an overview of what they are working on as well. So I'll get that to you.
Thank you.
Chairman Thorold, they've got a number of the projects going on. I can't remember how many. Marta, is it 13 or throughout New Mexico?
Yeah, it's something close to that. There are many projects going on.
And these are all test projects using different technologies. So we have been invited to go take a look at them if we want to. So if any of the commissioners would like to do that, just coordinate with our administrator and she can let you know where those are, and we can work something out with them to make that happen.
And sorry, if you don't mind, I'll add one more comment. You know, I believe in the last agenda, I included the website for the research consortium, and I recommend taking a look at the website, as they do give an overview of the work that they're doing for interested parties on their website. And so if you want a basic understanding of the work that they're doing, that's a good place to start as well.
One other question from that I have. This is Commissioner Thorwald. Is on UIC. That is underground injection control. And what are the items that are covered by that currently? From produced water injection. What is covered under that statute?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can go into a bit more detail with respect to UIC. And again, it might be a useful thing, and I probably should have included it here. And I'm happy to share it. But if you just look up the EPA's, you can just Google EPA UIC or underground injection control, and you can go to their website. And but EPA currently regulates 6 classes of underground injection wells. And so of those 6 classes, I'll go into a little bit of detail here, but try to be quick about it. So there's classes 1 through 6. Classes 1, well, I'll just specifically speak to the ones that specifically relate to oil, gas, and helium development, as well as CO2 and geothermal that are regulated by the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. So Class 1 and Class 5 would both be categorized as wells to inject produced water, and so those produced water from helium wells, which could potentially fall into 1 or 5, depending on variables. And basically some of those variables are with respect to the depth at which the water is to be injected or re-injected. And so we are in conversations with DEQ about classes 1 and class 5. And then additionally, oil and gas development is class 2. And so injection wells associated with oil and gas development. And when I say oil and gas, I specifically mean hydrocarbons in that category. And so we're in discussions with them regarding class 2 wells. And then class 5 could also be categorized for helium stimulation wells, which in Arizona are also regulated by aquifer protection permits. And then additionally, class 6 wells are wells used for the injection of CO2 and CO2 sequestration projects. And so that's kind of a basic overview with respect to classes 3 and 4. There's really not much overlap or anything to do with the Arizona Oil and Gas Conservation Commission.
Administrator Houghton, would you also, as long as we're into this, discuss hydrogen storage and how that interacts with this as well, and what's going on in the state with regard to that?
Well, that's actually an area that I've been in discussions with EPA with respect to which category and which underground storage facilities would fall into. So at this current point, I do not have an answer as to whether those would be regulated by UAC and what class in which they would fall under. But when we, at which point we pursue and we continue to move forward with this process, that will be determined.
Is there any questions, other questions or discussions on the presentation by Administrator Houghton before we move on?
Hey, this is Mike Conway. I do have a question for Marta. Marta, you mentioned that the class 3, I think class 3 solution mining wells was not a concern. I gather there's some solution mining going on in Arizona, but it's mostly for metals. Is that why it's not a concern for the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission?
With respect to what we currently regulate and what's within our current statutory authority, that's kind of where I state not of our concern. I'm not saying it's not concerning, and DEQ would, they are seeking primacy to regulate those types of injection. That's a question that we actually brought up to EPA with respect to underground storage and the potential overlap for solution mining and underground storage facilities. And so again, that's just one of those gray areas where I don't have an answer at this point. And again, all of this stuff is in process and just discussions that we're having with DEQ and EPA.
Okay, thank you, Marta.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 7, report by the chairman. I just came back from the IOGC's, well, let me just put it in the other way. The IOGC's annual conference. And the focus of the conference was on a number of areas. Of course, this funding package, the infrastructure package, underground storage and sequestration of hydrogen, of CO2, and then the underground storage of hydrogen and how that can be used not only for interstate transportation, but for power plants and other types of things as well. And then, of course, there was a presentation by ExxonMobil on a project they're doing in Houston that they're working on. They still have a lot of approvals left, but it's connecting all of the major producers of pollutants together through pipelines so that those pollutants could be sequestered. And the size of the project, they equated it as taking off all of the cars off the road, to give you an example of that. And they said many projects needed to be done like that to get to where the climate accords required. There was another presentation by the Department of Interior, the director who is overseeing the funding package for the infrastructure bill for oil and gas. And he talked about that, and we're going to be having further discussions with he and his staff in the next days to come on, and the IOGCC for that matter, on how we proceed. IOGCC has just sent us the initial forms that we need to use in the to note that we are interested in receiving funds from this, that we're going to apply for it. I have a call with the governor's office next week to discuss these things in more detail. And we've been coordinating with ADEQ on this and all of the appropriate procedures. And I'm just going to take a second to say again that, and I've said this before, Marta is doing lots of overtime that she's not getting paid for. And we are trying to get another person on board, justifying that at this point with ADEQ, so we can move forward with some of these aggressive agendas that we have. The budget, the federal grants, not only is, as Marta mentioned, that's initial 5 million, but there's these other packages that we've talked about, and we've been working with IOGCC on that. And part of the lack of clarity on some of these things is Interior is still developing the rule package on this and what's going to be required in some of these areas. So they're trying to move things as quick as possible to creation of jobs. So it's we're not getting all of the information yet, just simply because it's not available. But as it does become available, we'll present it. And I would suspect by our next meeting, we'll have quite a bit. And of course, we'll push it out to the commissioners as it becomes available. As Marta mentioned, the EPA, we've been working with them and continue to do that. And with DEQ jointly for primacy and clarification of this. On item D, 7D, there was discussion by O'Neill, Office of Navajo and Hopi Indian Relocation, with respect to our inspecting any drilling on their properties. That has not occurred yet. The federal government has said they would be interested in that as well, but no action has occurred. ONER is continuing to talk to their counterparts on the tribal lands and to the Navajo Nation and to the chapters, and but nothing has been resolved in that area yet. And I'm going to take this out of order. ADQ, we've continued to talk to them extensively on all of this and are working with them. And I have another call with the director next week. And we are talking to water quality on a number of these things and trying to make sure that we are more in sync and better coordinated with water quality. And some of these pieces that Marta was talking about with regard to plugging and abandoning, we're coordinating with Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, and DWR on this to make sure that we are standardizing how we deal with these abandoned wells. And then the legislation, item G, the legislation affecting the Oil and Gas Commission. Of course, right now it's the federal piece that's going on. None with regard to the infrastructure package. None of the other pieces with respect to oil have affected us, since we're mostly dealing with helium here. So that hasn't had any impact. Dale, do you have anything to report?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any questions on what I said from the commissioners? Any comments? The only thing I will say is we'll just keep you posted on how this comes about. And I know Marta is planning on sending out some more updates for you. She will be out of town for a short period of time on holidays. So if you have any questions, she'll let you know the day she's gone, so that if you don't hear back from her right away, that you'll know about that. Let's move on to agenda item 8, call to the public. Is there anybody in the public here that would like to address the commission? Again, anybody in the public that wants to address the commission? Hearing none, let's move on to agenda item 9, revenue review and consideration of future agenda items. Commissioners, I hope this presentations that Marta is doing has been beneficial. And I hope they're beneficial to the public as well. Does anybody have any comments or recommendations? Do you want to see us to continue with these things? Anything that you want to hear that we're not presenting? Commissioners, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, this is Bill. Again, I'd like to bring up the subject of bonding amounts on drill holes and be sure that we have sufficient bond to cover any remediation that needs to be done. How do we make that an agenda item? Or should it be done as an agenda item or just internally?
We can put it on the next agenda schedule. Administrator Hoden, if you would do that, and we can also send out some material on what's going on with that to the commissioners for you to review in between now and our next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Nations.
Commissioner Nations here. Frank, I appreciate your comments about Marta's presentation. I think those are very valuable and should be continued.
Thank you, Commissioner Nations. Any other
I
comments
would
from the
second
commission?
that. Thank you.
Hearing nothing else, let's move on to agenda item 10, announcements. Do we have any announcements? Marta, this is a good time for you to say when you're on holiday.
Oh, perfect. I will be out of the office December 3rd through 9th. Maybe the 2nd.
Also, AG Scarton is retiring, and we will have a new member of the AG's office. Jay, when will you be leaving?
I'll be leaving at the end of the year, and Josie Beljohn of our section will be taking over. She's very experienced at representing boards, and I'm sure you'll be happy working with you. As for me, I appreciate the opportunity to work with you all. It's been a very good and interesting experience for me, and
Thank
but I
you,
look
Jay.
forward to not having to do it anymore.
Josie, do you want to say something if you're online?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I apologize, I don't have my camera installed yet, but I will for the next meeting. My name's Josie Belgian. I've been with the Attorney General's office for 17 years, and for 13 of those years, I represented the Arizona State Retirement System Board. It's a 9-member public body that oversees the public retirement system. So I do have experience in open meeting law and working with public bodies, and I've enjoyed it. And in the short time I've spoken to Chairman Thorwald and Administrator Hoden, I've enjoyed the experience. So I look forward to working with everyone.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to having you on board. Here now we'll move on, since we don't have an executive session, to agenda item 12, adjournment. Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second, I second the motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 We are adjourned. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank
Thank you,
Tim.
Marta.
Thank you.